4 Range Rovers sit in the showroom. One was designed as the next Freelander. One shares its platform with a Jaguar. The name covers a price span of £185,000. In 2023, the company that makes them ranked dead last in American reliability surveys. In 2025, Russian hackers shut every factory for 5 weeks. But 55 years ago, a man called Spen King built the original, and it was so good they put it in the Louvre. This story doesn't start with the badge. It starts with the engineer. Chapter 1. The car that was meant to be hosed out. Charles Spencer King was born on the 26th of March, 1925. Nephew of Morris and Spencer Wilkes, the brothers who founded Land Rover. He apprenticed at Rolls-Royce during the war, joined Rover in 1945, and by 1959 was chief engineer of new vehicle projects. He had already led the Rover P6, which won European Car of the Year. He was an engineer, not a stylist. He understood metal and load paths and the behavior of suspension under stress. He did not, as it turned out, understand what people would do with the thing he was about to build. In 1966, King and a colleague called Gordon Bashford began sketching what they called the 100-inch station wagon. The brief, as one project engineer remembered it, was a premium leisure vehicle, but not really a luxury vehicle, and technically adventurous. There was market evidence from America: the International Scout, the Ford Bronco, the Jeep Wagoneer. Land Rover's American importers told King the 4x4 leisure market was going to be substantial. 26 pre-production vehicles were registered under a dummy company called Velar, from the Italian word meaning to veil or to conceal. That name would return 48 years later, attached to a very different car on a very different platform. For very different reasons. What King and his team built introduced 5 engineering firsts that no other off-road vehicle in the world offered at the same time. Permanent 4-wheel drive, not switchable, but permanent, with a 2-speed transfer box. Coil spring suspension front and rear, borrowed from the Rover P6 saloon, giving the ride of a car and the articulation of a Land Rover. 4-wheel disc brakes, a first for any off-roader. An aluminium V8 that Rover had bought the rights to from General Motors, producing 135 brake horsepower from 3.5 litres, and a hose-out interior. Spen King genuinely expected farmers and estates to wash it out like a Land Rover. PVC seats were palomino brown. There was no wood, no leather, no carpet. The launch price was £1,998, roughly twice the cost of a Ford Cortina, Britain's best-selling car. It went on sale on the 17th of June, 1970, and waiting lists formed on the first day. Within 18 months, a Range Rover would be sitting in the entrance hall of the Louvre in Paris, cited as an exemplary work of industrial design, the first and still the only motor vehicle ever exhibited there. That same car, the one the Louvre called an exemplary work of design, would within 35 years lend its name to a vehicle built on a cheaper platform from a cheaper brand, marketed with the help of a Spice Girl, and sold to people whose closest encounter with rough terrain was a gravel car park at a garden centre. Chapter 2. What the Jungle Proved. In December 1971, 2 Range Rovers were airdropped by military Hercules aircraft into Anchorage, Alaska, as part of the British Transamerica's expedition. The mission was to drive from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, crossing the Darien Gap, 250 miles of roadless jungle, between Panama and Colombia, where nothing with wheels had ever passed. The expedition was led by Major John Blashford Snell, with 64 men, mainly from the Royal Engineers and the 17th and 21st Lancers. They averaged 2.5 miles per day through the jungle. It took nearly 100 days. The Range Rovers were rafted across rivers on inflatable boats. The oversized swamp tires caused repeated differential failures. A development engineer flew from Solihull to Panama to redesign the differentials on the spot, while engineers back at the factory tried to recreate the conditions on the workshop floor. 5 Colombian support soldiers drowned. Around half the team was airlifted out for medical treatment. A crash-acquired Series 2 Land Rover, lighter and simpler, was arguably more useful than the Range Rovers during the worst of it. The older vehicle moved independently, while the 2 flagships sat stuck for 28 days, waiting for replacement parts. But once free of the jungle, the Range Rovers covered 800 miles a day across Chilean desert roads at 90 miles an hour, reaching Tierra del Fuego in June 1972. One of those expedition vehicles is preserved at the British Motor Museum in Gaydon. The other sits in the Dunsfold collection. Neither has a Victoria Beckham badge on the dashboard. The Darien Gap is the standard against which everything that follows should be measured. 2 vehicles, built by hand in Solihull, dragged through a jungle that killed men, repaired with parts flown from Birmingham, then driven flat out across a desert at speeds that would get you banned on the M1. It is the car they put in the Louvre. That is the car whose name they would spend the next 50 years selling to anyone willing to pay for it. Chapter 3. The company that couldn't kill it. Rover had been swallowed by British Leyland in 1968, part of a doomed attempt to consolidate the entire British car industry under one management. British Leyland grouped Rover and Land Rover alongside Triumph and Jaguar in a sprawling conglomerate that held 40% of the UK car market and could not make a profit from any of it. Weak management, government interference, warring unions, chronic underinvestment, and electrical components from the Lucas Company that would smoke and smoulder in every vehicle. From an Austin Maxi to a Jaguar XGX. The Range Rover survived this chaos for one reason. There was nothing else like it on Earth. Its market position was so singular that even British Leyland's neglect couldn't damage it. Customers kept buying because no competitor existed. The car went 26 years without a replacement, from 1970 to 1996, and for most of that period, it didn't even have a 4-door option or an automatic gearbox. Customers wanted both. British Leyland couldn't be bothered. The automatic didn't arrive until 1982. The factory 4-door came in 1981. King himself had designed the car with 2 doors only, a decision that infuriated buyers in the Middle East, where owners employed drivers and expected rear passenger doors as a basic requirement. Despite all this, the car sold, and sold, and sold. Land Rover claimed in 1992 that 70% of all the vehicles they had ever built were still in use. The Range Rover was officially America's most expensive SUV when it finally arrived there in March 1987, 17 years after its British launch. Grey market imports had been so successful through the early 1980s that American dealers had been selling privately imported Range Rovers long before Land Rover opened an official US operation. The car created demand for itself, even when the company behind it couldn't be bothered to meet it. The reliability problems that started here, under British Leyland's chronic underfunding and Lucas Electric's, never fully left. They became structural. They became the brand. British Leyland was nationalised in 1975. Triumph was killed in 1984. Morris disappeared the same year. MG's Abingdon factory, making MGs since the 1920s, closed in 1980. But Land Rover was separated out in 1979 as its own company, and in 1988, British Aerospace bought the Rover Group for £150 million. They ran it with minimal investment. Then they sold it. Chapter 4. The German who sat blindfolded. On the 31st of January 1994, BMW announced the purchase of the Rover Group from British Aerospace for £800 million. BMW got Rover, Land Rover, MG, Mini, and a collection of dormant marquees. British Aerospace had paid $150 million 6 years earlier, a tidy return for having done almost nothing. The man who mattered was Wolfgang Reitzler, BMW's research and development chief, appointed chairman of Rover Group. Reitzler sat blindfolded in a P38A Range Rover, the second-generation model that had just launched, and performed a touch test on every interior surface. He identified 70 individual areas for improvement in quality, strength, and durability. 70. The verdict was immediate. Rather than approve a midlife facelift, Reitzler cancelled the planned updates and directed all resources toward a clean sheet replacement. Development of the third-generation Range Rover, the L322, began as early as 1995. The P38A, meanwhile, went on to become one of the least reliable luxury cars of its era. Air suspension failures, corroding engine control units, mystery electrical faults. In a 2001 customer satisfaction survey, it finished 19th from the bottom. Land Rover was rated Britain's second worst manufacturer for warranty claims. Reitzler had been right about every one of those 70 faults, but BMW's ownership of Rover was already unravelling. By 1999, Rover car sales were collapsing. The controlling Quandt family estimated the total Rover disaster had cost 15 billion Deutschmarks. In March 2000, BMW sold Land Rover to Ford for £1.85 billion. Mini was kept and relaunched brilliantly. The rest of Rover went to the Phoenix Consortium for £10. Ford placed Land Rover inside its premier automotive group alongside Jaguar, Aston Martin, Lincoln and Volvo. Reitzler moved with Land Rover as head of the group, and the L322, the car Reitzler had commissioned, launched in late 2001 with BMW engines, a BMW electronics architecture borrowed from the 5 Series, and the best interior any Land Rover had ever produced. Ford's own design boss called it the best interior he had ever seen. The L322 was the first Range Rover to abandon the traditional body-on-frame construction. BMW had arm-twisted the change to a steel monocoque, a unibody structure, overriding Land Rover engineers who had insisted for decades that only a separate chassis could handle serious off-road work. Fully independent suspension replaced the old live axles. The British design team won the exterior competition against proposals from BMW's Chris Bangle and an outside firm. The car was built in Solihull. Reitzler left in 2002 before the car went on sale. Nearly 300,000 L322s were produced over 11 years. It was, by most accounts, the finest Range Rover since the original. And then Ford did the thing that changed everything. Chapter 5. The discovery in Range Rover clothing. The creation of the Range Rover Sport is one of the most consequential decisions in the brand's history. Under BMW, the project had started as something called Project Heartland, an attempt to win buyers in America's interior, not just the coasts. Under Ford, it evolved. In September 2000, Ford decided that the Discovery replacement and a new, smaller Range Rover would share the same chassis. The internal documents actually used the phrase Baby Range Rover. The Range Stormer concept debuted at the 2004 Detroit Motor Show. A low-slung, 3-door coupe with gull-wing doors and a claimed top speed of 180 miles per hour. It set enormous expectations. The production Range Rover Sport arrived in May 2005, and it was a fundamentally different vehicle. 5 doors, conservative proportions, and built on a modified version of the Discovery 3's chassis. A cheaper vehicle. It had less interior space than the Discovery 3 and could not accommodate 7 seats, but it carried the Range Rover name and was priced considerably above the car whose platform it actually stood on. One reviewer called it a cocksure mongrel, disguising Discovery underpinnings beneath marketing lie badging. Under BMW, this vehicle could never have been built. BMW did not want a sports crossover poaching sales from the X5. Under Ford, the handcuffs were off. The Sport sold strongly from launch because the Range Rover name meant luxury regardless of the engineering underneath. This was the moment. This was when the badge stopped being a guarantee of engineering distinction and became a pricing mechanism. Chapter 6. The Freelander that became a Range Rover. In 2008, Ford was hemorrhaging money. Annual losses of $12.8 billion in 2007. Aston Martin was sold in March. On the 2nd of June, Tata Motors, India's largest automobile company, completed the purchase of Jaguar Land Rover for $2.3 billion. Many observers thought the deal was reckless. Tata's stock crashed. JLR lost $510 million in its first 10 months under new ownership. But Tata's approach was patient. Leave British management in place. Back them with capital. From 2010 to 2015, Tata invested approximately £12 billion in JLR's future, and by 2015, the company was making £2.6 billion profit before tax. The fourth-generation Range Rover, the L405, launched in 2012 as the first production 4x4 in the world with an all-aluminium body, saving 420 kilograms over its predecessor. It was a genuine engineering achievement. But the decision that defined this era happened a year earlier. The Range Rover Evoque launched in September 2011, and the truth of its origins is remarkably simple. It started life as the next Land Rover Freelander, a mid-size family SUV replacement. Somewhere in development, it was upgraded to Range Rover status, specifically to justify a higher price point. One used car authority put it plainly. Given that the Evoque started life as the next Freelander, but suddenly found itself upgraded to Range Rover status en route to launch in order to justify its price, you would be forgiven for approaching it with suspicion. The Evoque was built on a modified Ford platform, shared with the Land Rover Discovery Sport and the Tata Harrier, not the Range Rover flagship platform. Before going on sale, Land Rover had 18,000 pre-orders. First-generation Evoque sold over 800,000 units worldwide. 90% of buyers were new to the Range Rover brand. Victoria Beckham was appointed as a design consultant for a special edition. The same car Spen King designed to cross the Darien Gap was now being marketed with the help of a Spice Girl. To people the company's own marketing documents described as city shapers in the 24 to 45 age bracket. King had died in June 2010. He never had to see it. But he had said what he thought 6 years earlier, in 2004, when he publicly criticized urban Range Rover owners and declared that his vehicle was never intended as a status symbol and that later versions seemed designed specifically for that purpose. He drove a Volkswagen Golf. Chapter 7. Same wheelbase, different badge, different price. In March 2017, the Range Rover Velar was unveiled at the London Design Museum. The name was borrowed from the 1969 pre-production prototypes, a nod to heritage, or a borrowing of it, depending on your generosity. It won the World Car Design Award. It was also built on the same aluminium platform as the Jaguar XE, the Jaguar XF, and the Jaguar F-Pace. Same wheelbase, same engines, same suspension architecture. One motoring publication laid it out with precision. The Velar and F-Pace use the same aluminium body architecture, the same engines, much of the same suspension. Their wheelbase is the same, which of course they would be, because Jaguar and Land Rover are all the same company. Why would they do the work twice? The Velar was 72mm longer than the F-Pace and had optional air suspension. The differences were real, but marginal. The price gap between the two was not. There were now 4 vehicles using the Range Rover name: the Evoque, the former Freelander; the Sport, the rebadged Discovery; the Velar, the Jaguar in a different suit; and the flagship, starting at £105,000. 1 car in 1970, 4 cars in 2017. The cheapest at roughly £40,000, the dearest above £225,000. The name had been stretched until it covered everything and guaranteed nothing. Chapter 8. Dead last. Land Rover's reputation for unreliability is not new. It runs through the Lucas Electrics of the British Leyland era, the corroding ECUS of the P38A, the air suspension failures of the L322, and straight into the modern range. In 2020, Land Rover finished last out of 31 car makers in the What Car Socials Reliability Survey, nearly 10% worse than the brand directly above it. In 2023, J.D. Power ranked Land Rover dead last in its American Vehicle Dependability Study, with 273 problems per 100 vehicles. In 2026, they were third from the bottom at 274. In 2021, JLR's chief executive publicly conceded that quality issues were costing the company over 100,000 sales per year. Prospective customers who wanted the car but chose a competitor specifically because they didn't trust it to work. Warranty costs were a significant financial drag. Common faults across recent models included air suspension failures, engine control unit problems, diesel engine oil dilution causing crankshaft failures, timing chain stretch, turbo failures, and persistent electronic gremlins. In 2018, protests took place outside JLR's headquarters in Shanghai over quality problems with Chinese market vehicles. The car that Spen King built to survive the Darien Gap was now being protested outside a sales office by customers whose air suspension had collapsed in a car park. Chapter 9. 5 weeks of silence. On the 31st of August 2025, a cyber attack began on JLR's IT systems. By the 22nd of September, all production had ceased at Solihull, Wolverhampton, Halewood, and a factory in Slovakia. The attack was classified as a Category 3 systemic event by the Cyber Monitoring Center, the most serious category they track. Russian hackers were identified as responsible. Production was suspended for approximately 5 weeks. Each week of halted production cost JLR an estimated £108 million in fixed costs and lost profit. The 5-week shutdown caused UK car production to fall by 27% in September, the worst September for the British car industry since 1952. The total estimated UK financial impact was £1.9 billion, affecting over 5,000 organisations in JLR's supply chain. The Bank of England cited the attack as one reason for slower GDP growth. JLR posted a loss before tax of £485 million for the quarter. For the full fiscal year ending March 2026, the company recorded an after-tax loss of £244 million. Annual sales to dealers fell 23% to just over 300,000 vehicles, pushing below break-even. JLR announced £1.7 billion in spending cuts over 2 years. American tariffs on imported vehicles added further pressure. In March 2026, a fire at a Norwegian supplier shut the Solihull plant again for nearly 2 weeks. The chief executive retired in November 2025. His replacement, a Tata Motors finance director, arrived with a mandate to make each brand financially responsible for its own performance. The company that had posted £2.6 billion profit in 2015, that had turned Tata's gamble into a triumph over 7 extraordinary years, was back in crisis. Not from bad engineering or failed products, but from the accumulated weight of a reliability reputation it had never fixed, a cyber attack it had never prepared for, and a brand name it had stretched across 4 vehicles until no single one of them could carry its full meaning. The all-electric Range Rover Originally promised for 2024, then late 2025, is now expected in the final quarter of 2026. 78,000 people are on the waiting list. It will be built at Block 1, the historic original Land Rover factory at Solihull, where the first series Land Rovers were assembled in 1948. A new vehicle, on a new platform, in the oldest building. Whether the name on the bonnet still means what it meant when Spen King's prototype first rolled out of that same factory in 1967 is a question the market will answer. Chapter 10. What the Golf driver knew. Spen King died on the 26th of June, 2010 at 85. He was awarded a CBE. He drove a Volkswagen Golf. He had built one car, one Range Rover, a vehicle with a hose-out interior and coil springs borrowed from a family saloon. Designed to be driven by farmers and tested by soldiers in conditions that killed men and broke differentials and left vehicles waterlogged in Panamanian rivers. That car went into the Louvre. It won the RAC Dewar Award. It crossed the Darien Gap. It was so fundamentally right that it survived 26 years of British leyland neglect without a replacement. Then they put its name on a Discovery and called it a Sport. They put its name on a Freelander and called it an Evoque. They put its name on a Jaguar and called it a Velar. They sold 800,000 Evoques to people who had never owned a Range Rover before, and called that success. They ranked dead last in reliability and called that a legacy issue. They lost production for 5 weeks to Russian hackers and posted a £250 million annual loss and called that a one-off. 4 Range Rovers in the showroom, 1 badge, £185,000 between the cheapest and the dearest. The man who designed the original looked at what his car had become, said it was never intended as a status symbol, and drove his Volkswagen home. That is the story of the Range Rover. One perfect car, and the decisions that piece by piece took it all apart.